Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. And today we're going to talk to the founder of MBA ASAP. And he founded MBA ASAP because he got fed up with the student debt crisis and he released his entire MBA course for a fraction of the cost to level the playing field. He's an author, entrepreneur, speaker, investor, and I'm really happy to have him on to discuss his experience and expertise and add value to the audience. So, John, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, briefly introduce yourself and we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, thanks. Well, as you said, I'm primarily an entrepreneur and investor. I started out as an engineer and then became an entrepreneur and then now investor also. And the company that I have now is called MBA ASAP. And that basically is, MBA skills, Master of Business Administration, ASAP, as soon as possible. And so what I've done, throughout my career, I founded well over a dozen companies and had some successful exits. I took two public and was in a public company CFO and CEO for 15 years. And then I started teaching in universities. My sister was teaching finance, in the evenings, and I thought that was so cool. So I looked around and started getting some teaching assignments in different universities and colleges. And as I was teaching the students, the undergrads and then the MBA students, I realized that first of all, the textbooks are like this thick, right? And 800 pages on accounting, 800 pages on finance, 800 pages on marketing, and from my experience as an entrepreneur and then as a public company, executive, realized that I don't use that stuff every day. The stuff that I use every day, it's like football, right? The fundamentals, blocking and tackling, it's like there's a certain skill set that's fundamentals that you actually really need to know. And then everything else is sort of around the periphery of that. And so as I started to, probe my students, realized that they really didn't have a sense of what was really important on an everyday basis and what was sort of maybe intellectually interesting as an idea, say in finance or something. And so I really brought it back to the fundamentals, and I could see the light bulbs go off in my students. They were like, yeah, people would say, I've had, 5 accounting courses and I never really understood what a balance sheet was, and I, in this last 20 minutes, you told me this stuff. And so I realized there was a real niche for that. And so I started to refine those tools. It was, my classroom was kind of like my laboratory, right? I could go in there and see what worked and what didn't, what made them understand things, and then where their eyes sort of glazed over and I just lost them. And so little by little, I refined my material and my content. And then I started to, use slide decks to do that and make little white papers and things. And then little by little, that became books and then courses. Initially, I just started filming my classroom at the whiteboard on my iPhone, right? And then coming home and editing them and uploading them to I did a couple of different, educational platforms. One that's been very good for me is one called Udemy. And just uploading those, my videos and then with my books and things and using Kindle Direct Publishing from Amazon to just upload my Word manuscripts, and they have a cover creator. You can create books and start selling them quickly. So that's how I started the content online. And then that started to get quite a bit of traction. And now I have, well over 30,000 students in 165 countries. I mean, all around the world, everywhere. I didn't even know there was 165 countries. I have students in Mauritius and Madagascar and the Maldives and throughout South America and Africa and Middle East and Southeast Asia. It's just so thrilling to me to be able to be in contact with all these different people, and they all have an interest in adding business skills to their skill stack. Whatever anyone's doing, some business skills, some fundamental knowledge of accounting and finance and marketing can help whether you're a baker or you're a car mechanic or whatever you're doing. Having that sort of some professional business skills in your skill stack can help everyone. So that's been sort of my motivation and my goal. And it's interesting. It's almost like gamified in a way. As I go online every morning, it's like, how many, who's bought my book and how many new students do I have and this and that. And those little clicks and emails are like a little dopamine rush, sort of like what we get from scrolling on Facebook or something. And so that's been a motivational thing for me, is that incremental, incentive every day. And so it's been a great ride. It's been really fun.
Yeah, you're obviously very successful and accomplished. And so one thing I wanted to pick your brain is, the one thing is, I've always studied the ultra successful and ultra wealthy, and you have this mantra, less is more, and drop your bad habits for explosive productivity. And people are thinking like, do more. You got to do more to be more productive. So what do you say the opposite?
Oh, Chris, that's a great point. Yeah. And you're right. I think that we tend to think that it's more about adding more to what we're doing to really get more successful. And Saint Exupéry, the guy who wrote The Little Prince, said one time that perfection isn't when you've added enough. Perfection is when you've taken enough away, from things and whittled it down to its essence. And I think that's true. I know for me, what's really helped me is getting rid of my bad habits. And we tend to pick up things in youth that then are harder to jettison once we get a little bit older. And like they say, initially the chains of habit are very light, but then they become such a burden you can't get rid of them. And so things like health habits, like drinking alcohol, smoking pot and stuff, those kind of things are really fun maybe, but they really are a distraction. If you're drinking, the time you're drinking, you're out partying, that's not productive time necessarily. Certainly when you have a hangover, that's not productive time. Marijuana is legal here in New Mexico now, and for the last few years. And that's great. And once something's legal, people think it's safe, it's great. But if you're sitting on the couch watching reruns of Gilligan's Island every day instead of, adding to your life, that's not necessarily so productive. And another thing, is television. I got rid of my television about 30 years ago. And getting rid of my television was one of the biggest things to me to allow me to have productive time instead of, it's so easy, it's so seductive to just sit down in front of the screen and say, oh, I need a rest. I'm just going to sit here and chill for a while. And 4 hours go by and you've been watching, some kind of wacky shows, and that's time squandered that you cannot get back. And so those kind of what you even think of as bad habits may necessarily be really bad habits, but those kind of things are really tough. I smoked cigarettes for a while. I was when my first marriage, my wife was a cigarette smoker, and I picked up the habit, and boy, was that hard to get rid of. And when I finally did, I realized I was smoking about a pack a day. That's 20 cigarettes. Each cigarette takes maybe say 10 minutes, just to make it, round through the math easy. So 20 times 10 is 200 minutes a day. And once and you'd go outside or whatever. And once I stopped smoking, I realized I've got all this free time. And that time would allow me, I just published my 63rd book. And I think a lot of my time to be, and people say, how do you find the time to write? Well, I found it by sort of jettisoning these habits that then allowed me to have that time that I could use more productively. And one of the other great things about stopping smoking for me, I didn't realize, was every time I lit up a cigarette, I knew it was bad for me. I knew it was bad for me, but I couldn't stop. And so I had this dialogue in my mind, like on one shoulder, the angel, on the other, the devil, and saying, you shouldn't smoke. And shut up, and so you have to have this fatalistic attitude of, well, you got to die sometime or something like that. And once I stopped smoking, I realized that stress and tension of this internal dialogue that I was having with myself and feeling guilty and all, that went away. And that was one of the most a lightness of being, uplifting things that they ever experienced. So I really found that, yeah, jettisoning, identifying what's habits that you spend too much time doing, that I did, I spent too much time doing, getting rid of those so that then you create that space so that productivity can come in, you can follow your interests. And it's little things. It's, you do something just maybe a half hour, 15 minutes a day, and like flake on flake, like a snowstorm, each flake of snow is not that much, but after a while it builds up and all of a sudden you have 2 feet of snow, so it's that type of cumulative effect of doing things.
Interesting. I want to ask you because you talk about, because what's interesting is, you went Wharton and you're an investor and then taking two companies public. So talk about thinking patterns because I'm always interested in how the Uber just kind of like your non-standard individuals, how they think, how they view the world, especially when it comes to wealth. And then we'll talk about the benefits of being a generalist.
Oh, excellent, Chris. Those are great questions. Yeah. In fact, I just published the book, two books. One was called Focus and one is on mental models and thinking about those kind of things. The way that so I've been thinking exactly about these issues. And the way I write really is just to get to organize my ideas on a topic that I've been thinking about for a while. They say, if you're underthinking, read, so you get inspiration. And if you're overthinking, write. So you just dump that stuff out of your brain and put it in some sort of organized form. And the act of writing really clarifies your thought processes. So I think that as one way of thinking about the world is just to take time to write down your ideas because it's first of all, it's very hard to do, I found, but the act of writing forces you to clarify your thinking. I found so many times I think I understand a concept that I really been carrying in my mind, and then I start to write it down, and it's like, I don't really understand it that clearly because I can't write it succinctly and eloquently, and I have to refine and refine until I get my ideas really clear to myself. And it's like a mirror in a way. It reveals myself to myself. It reveals oneself by that act of writing and forcing yourself to be clear.
Hmm.
And it's also an intentional thing. And there's so many different mental models. Charlie Munger, the great investor who was Warren Buffett's partner, who just passed away last year, just a great guy. His book, Poor Charlie's Almanac, is a great font of wisdom. But he said that what we need are a lattice work of mental models, different ones that like a toolkit that we can use in different types of situations. And part of that, those are things like the Pareto principle and understanding that there's these power laws that, 20% of what you do is going to create 80% of the results. And that type of power law is all over the place. Coca-Cola has, I forget what they call it, power users. And 20% of the people that drink Coca-Cola consume 80% of the Coca-Cola. So there's all these kind of things in marketing and in all kinds in nature where you see these type of things and finding what are those things that you can do that you can leverage basically. It take 20% of your time and give you 80% of the results. Those are the kind of things to focus on, whether it's investing or anything productivity that you're doing, and finding those type of things that really leverage your efforts so you get the most bang for the buck out of them. Another thing is probabilistic thinking in probabilities. It's never really a decision-making tool where it's never going to be right or wrong in a way. It's like, well, this has an 80% chance of happening, or it has a 60% chance of happening, or a 95% chance of happening. And to be able to have an intuition about probabilities like that, because you think, well, 95% chance of happening, that means it's a sure thing. No, there's still 5% chance that things will go against you and it won't happen. And one way to cultivate intuition about probabilities is to, say, play poker, where you really start like Texas Hold'em is a great game where you can really quantify a lot of the probabilities of your hand winning or your hand losing. And sometimes you think, oh, I got an 80% chance of winning. That's really good. And then sure enough, the 20% comes up and you're like, oh, now I understand how big that 20%, chance of losing in that situation is. And another thing about that is what they call resulting, and not being, when you make a decision, and then whether it goes right or wrong, it has a probability of happening or not. And sometimes you might say it is 80%, 70%. I don't want to use the 80-20 too much. 70% chance of happening, 30% chance of not. It's like, I like those odds, 30%. And then if it doesn't happen, you're like, oh, I knew it. I made the wrong decision and all. That's not the case. With the information, we're always making decisions with less than incomplete information. So, after the fact, if you say, oh, that was a dumb decision because it didn't work out the way I wanted. No, you have to really go back and realize with the information you had at the time, you thought it was 70% chance of happening. That was a good decision, but the 30% ended up being the reality, and it's not good to go back and then judge your decisions based on what happens, because there is that probabilistic chance that it won't. So there's all these different mental models that can help us, and it's good to know a lot of them, and also our biases. Daniel Kahneman, the great economist, had the book Thinking Fast and Slow, where he outlined a lot of our biases. We have these shortcuts that we use mental model wise to make decisions, because otherwise we'd have too much information. We wouldn't know what to do, and we'd have paralysis by analysis, just keep analyzing things and never making a decision, where making a quick decision is very beneficial in many aspects. So we have these shortcuts to do that. They're called heuristics, right? But they have biases built into them that we have to be aware of, like our confirmation bias. Like if we have an opinion we're holding, we go out and seek information that confirms that opinion we're having, instead of going out and seeking things that may challenge that belief that we're holding, and to continually update and reevaluate our beliefs, so that we are really operating from a place with beliefs that serve us.
Yeah, I love that, and I think Ray Dalio talks a lot about that. And I recently listened to, I think it was the We Study Billionaires podcast, where they were talking about the power law and how VCs and a lot of the some of the main insights were from talking to hedge fund and traders and managers, and how they think about things. It's completely different than the way the mainstream individuals think about how to become wealthy. The other question is, why is it beneficial to be a generalist instead of a specialist?
Well, that's a great question. There was a book about the power of being a generalist. One of the great things about being a generalist is acts of creativity. If you want to be an original thinker, and to be an entrepreneur or in any kind of business, you're looking for creative ways to solve problems and to think about things differently, right? Think different. And most creativity, we tend to think that creativity is some inspiration that just like boom, comes out of the blue, and oh my goodness, now I understand this thing. But really, what a lot of times it is putting things together from different subjects in a new and novel way. Being able to take something from one subject and see how could that apply in this situation, in some others, in other realm. And if you can put maybe two or three things together in a novel way, suddenly you have a unique product or service. And so that is the benefit of being a generalist, is you have lots of different things to pick from. And what we mean by a generalist, what I mean is someone who knows a lot about many subjects, but not too deep, maybe a couple inches deep on things. But and that's been discredited. The Latin word Johannes factotum, jack of all trades, someone who knows everything. There's that discrediting of that, like, jack of all trades, master of none. And there's some truth in that. You have to be specialist enough in something to be really good at it, and pick something that you really hone as your craft and practice and have deep knowledge about, but then knowing about lots of other things. First of all, I think it makes us a more rounded human, rounded person. So it's more satisfying to live in that way. And as we talk about wealth isn't just about how much money is in your checking account, but how rich your life is that you're leading, and how much satisfaction you get from life. And that comes from being a generalist, I think, knowing, enjoying music and enjoying art and enjoying literature and enjoying science, and having all these different, following your curiosity wherever it may lead. You may suddenly just look up at the night sky and say, gee, I really wonder how the planets and the moon, and what is that bright star there? And suddenly then you start to, learn about astronomy or whatever it is. You start to just follow those little instinctual things that come up. And now we have all these tools. It's incredible at our fingertips. You can just Google search something, and all of the knowledge that's ever been around is at our fingertips through our phones and our computers. It's just, we're living in a marvelous time to actually to satisfy our curiosity. And one way to even find out what your curiosities are is you have to quiet yourself enough to actually hear those voices. And so meditation practices like that, where you really try to silence all the noise in your, it's going, oh, I got to go to the supermarket. Oh, I got to fix this flat tire. Oh, tomorrow I have to take the kids da 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 da. Get all that stuff quieted so you can hear your own self and what your faint interests are, and then start to cultivate those and draw them out so that you reveal yourself to yourself again. Get that point. I think those are the things that make being a generalist very satisfying. Now, it's incredibly satisfying to be a specialist too. I mean, you're a very impressive specialist, PhD, MD. You have knowledge, in very specific areas that's incredibly deep. And that's the way that knowledge progresses, is through people that really study things, come up with novel, research, and then add that to what, human knowledge. So that's incredible too. So I think it is a balance. It's good to be a generalist. And I think that one of the reasons that to think that a generalist is good is that it's been kind of disparaged for so long as, oh, you know about a lot of stuff, but not enough to make a difference. But really being able to pull from different areas. I think a guy like Richard Feynman, the physicist, who had a lot, he would go to Brazil and play the bongos and stuff, all kinds of cool stuff, because he was just, so insatiably curious. And I think that shows a vivaciousness and a life affirming attitude that's really, really good. And it also, I think, replenishes us to go back and do the hard work of the specialist, is if we take some time and just, drink from English poetry from the 1600s or something, and just, and it puts us in touch with lots of different people and ideas, and makes us appreciate how big the world is.
Mhm. Yeah. And, you said so much on creativity, just putting things together. It's not just like just one. I mean, sometimes it's like one key insightful idea, but usually it's just kind of tinkering and just putting things together, either processes or different ideas. And I really loved Richard Feynman. His autobiography was so fast, just like he's so brilliant, just the way he viewed the world. My question for you is, because I've been studying kind of where our world is going. And, until recently, I didn't like the direction it was going. It's just kind of, people profiting, just a lot of corruption. And there's this issue of education, and to me, it's becoming a playground for the rich. The rich can use it to get richer. And I like countries like Europe. Everybody's educated,
Yeah.
everybody. It doesn't matter if you're poor or rich. It's just, but here in the States, if you want to be educated, you have to be wealthy. So do you think where do you see education? And is it just going to be something where the rich just get richer? Or is it going to go away? Like we won't need universities, like we'll have artificial intelligence. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, that's a fascinating subject. 'Cause, yeah, it's yeah. Well, that's one reason why I started MBA ASAP, was that I went to Wharton, at the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League, MBA program. And I wanted to go there for many reasons, but one was, is there secret knowledge that these elites know, that, is there a secret handshake or something like that? What is it? And it turns out there isn't any really secret knowledge. It's pretty common sense stuff. And they had wonderful professors there and wonderful colleagues, my students, and it was a great experience. But I was working at ABC television at the time in New York City, and I decided that, and I had a young son and a family, and, and I could have stayed at ABC and gotten my MBA, going at night to maybe like NYU or Columbia or something, going at night, studying on the weekends. ABC would have paid for it, but I wouldn't have had any other life. I had a young child, and I was kind of burnt out. I'd been doing that engineering work for the television broadcasting network for 10 years. And it was really exciting and fun. It was all sports and news and all these great programs. But I thought I'd really like to go, instead of going nights for 4 years, go back for 2 years and just study full time and really just devote myself to it, not have to worry about work and all these other distractions. I'd have time with my family. So ended up going to Wharton, And Wharton didn't have a night school anyway. It's just during the day. So 2 years. So I left my job. It was a high paying job, went to school. It was a high tuition. I had all my, living expenses for my family during that time. I ended up digging a hole of about $400,000 for myself over 2 years. That's tough to recover from, and it was that type of elite type of gatekeeping that has a big price tag to it. And I felt that for a decade, and I was like, was that the wisest decision I could have made? And so I wanted to bring that type of education to everyone. So for a couple $100, you can take my course. It's all videos. You can look at them on your phone. You can look at them on your computer. You can repeat them. If you daydream for a second in a classroom, right? The teacher's moving on. You can't say, could you go back and, rewind for the last 10 minutes? Because I was looking out the window. But you can do that with a video. And so it has a lot of pedagogical benefits even. And to make it more accessible to everyone. Everyone should have access to education, because I truly believe that education is one of those tools that can lift everyone up. It may not, but you have the opportunity if you keep educated and you keep continually learning, you have opportunities that you don't have if you don't keep learning. So
Hmm.
I wanted to make that available to everyone all around the world, and not have it be limited by money, by geography, right? You can't go to Harvard unless you live in, Eastern Massachusetts, or you can't go to Stanford unless you're in the Bay Area or something. So I wanted to try to make that available to everyone. And you're right. It seems in the United States, it really is the purview of the wealthy and these elites that then get to go to school. And that's fine. God bless them, but it should be available for everyone. Like you say, in Europe, college is free. And we have up to 12th grade free here. Why couldn't we have up to 16th grade be free? The 4 years of college could be free, and it would benefit everyone. The GI Bill, when the soldiers came back from World War II, they had the GI Bill. Many of them took advantage of it to go to college and university, and that created a big economic boom, because suddenly you had all these educated professionals entering the workforce, and all of that, in aggregate, really made for an economic boom. So I think we could do that again. I think we're overlooking cultivating the potential of the people here, and the workforce and everything to really do. If everybody just does an incrementally bit better, that's that's a lot over 350 million people or something.
Yeah. The other thing, final question is, because you talked about, creating a life of satisfaction. And, what I found is because, you've taught at Ivy League and you got, you've taken companies public. And so and obviously talking to you, you resemble a lot of the thinking patterns of the ultra wealthy, the billionaires. So the question is like, creating a life of satisfaction, and everybody's like, yeah, if I only had a little bit more money, or if I had 100 million, or if I were a billionaire, I'd be happy. But talk about like creating a life of satisfaction is not around there, because I know here in the States, our worth is kind of equated to success and how much we make and all of this. But talk about how a life of satisfaction is not that.
Well, and you're absolutely right, Chris. And I think that, that's, you have to think of what's the end goal. We're all like, well, if I just get more money, then I'm going to have this or that, and there's a great anecdote of Kurt Vonnegut, the writer, and I can't remember his name, the guy that wrote Catch 22. They were friends, and they were at a billionaire's house back in the 60s. And they were out on the patio having a smoke, they said, and Kurt Vonnegut and Catch 22 became a huge bestseller. And Vonnegut said I can't think of the guy's name now, but the guy who wrote Catch 22, and he said, you got a bestseller now, but you'll never, this guy makes more in a day than your bestseller is going to make in a year. And then that guy turned to Vonnegut and said, yeah, but I have something he doesn't. And Vonnegut said, what? He said, enough. And it said, that thing about, when is enough and what is enough? Money. Think about now they're valuing Elon Musk at $420 billion. I mean, that's like almost $500 billion.
Yeah.
When does it become enough? And there's wonderful billionaires like, I think, Bill Gates, he's coming out with a new book about his childhood. I just read an excerpt of it. Really fascinating. But he's made the Gates Foundation, and he gives all his money to charities, and they take a business sort of approach to how they're going to measure the impact of what they do for, eradicating malaria or all these different types of things. Really, really wonderful that incredibly talented, smart people can do beneficial things. But yeah, I think that life is more than being on this treadmill where we just keep chasing this receding goalposts of, well, yeah, if I only make 10 million, well, but now I need 100 million, and to keep having that receding thing. It's not a way to live a satisfying life. And I think there's, things like just family and engagement in community and the arts and things that cultivating, exercise, being out in nature, all these kind of things are just so important to us, to create well-rounded, satisfied people. Because when we're satisfied, then that shows, and then that helps everybody else around us get on that same kind of wavelength and all. But if we're just stressed and looking for the next thing, and every time we have a win, we just discard that and just move on to the next goal. That's it gets old, it gets old for us. And then you look back, and one of the great things is a practice to have is, what is the advice that the 85-year-old you would give to yourself? Would it be, and no one on their deathbed says, I really should have spent more weekends at the office, or something like that, right? It's like, what's the advice that that yourself would give to yourself now, and say, maybe take it slower, you know, cherish the things around you that are going good, instead of focusing on, I think one of our survival mechanisms are that we focus on what's wrong with life, other than what's right with life, because for our survival back in prehistoric times, we really had to do that. But nowadays, we don't have to put so much overemphasis on every little mistake we make or something that's not to our satisfaction. And it all comes down to expectations too, right? If we have big expectations about something, and then the situation or circumstances doesn't meet up to our expectations, we're disappointed. And that, if we have less expectations, then sometimes we can be pleasantly surprised by things.
Mm, yeah, I love that. And yeah, when you have individuals net worth more than the GDP of some countries, so the world is kind of
Yeah,
skewed. But
absolutely.
yeah. Last question is, because I know you, and I love, they say leaders are readers, and you have this book, and for the people watching or listening, the link to the live stream video will be in the show notes. But what book would you recommend people read and pick up, just for, to get the gist of this conversation, or to get more perspective on life? What would you recommend? Which book?
Oh, wow. Well, there's just so many, I read hundreds of books over time, and they're all really super great. I should have had an answer ready for this question, but well, one that I'm actually looking at right now, I'm just going to go back to my shelf here, because then I can show you. But this book right here, just rereading it, it's called Coming of Age in the Milky Way, and it's all about our understanding through history of the cosmos, and how it started out in ancient times and antique times, trying to look for, when there'd be a solar eclipse or all those kind of things, when best to plant, all the, when it was the vernal equinox, all these kind of, and it's amazing to me that our ancestors were so brilliant about figuring out these things about how the stars operated, and how the seasons changed and all, and all of the different zodiac signs, and how the sun would pass through them at different times of year. So in those ways, I think that's a great book. But there's just so many wonderful books. I think that and I think for everybody it's different too. So I would just encourage anyone to just pick up any book that they find interesting, and just spend some quiet time in a book, because it's a way for us to actually be in someone else's mind. How else can you get that deep into a brilliant thinker's mind? Like reading, you could read Seneca from, 2000 years ago, talking about how to live. And Seneca, at that time, he was the richest person in Rome. And yet he was a Stoic philosopher that thought even as a wealthy person, I can still live a good life. And Marcus Aurelius, I was thinking this the other day too. Seneca was the richest, and he lived about 100 years before Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius was in about maybe 150 AD, and Seneca maybe 50 AD. And Marcus Aurelius said, one can live a good life even in a palace. And he was the emperor of Rome. Those type of ideas, these people that would take their wealth and their power and things like that. I say, wait a minute, those things are fine and dandy if I use them correctly, but still, what does it mean to live a good, rich life? So
Yeah.
those are two. Marcus Aurelius's meditations and letters to something or other. Those two
Yeah.
would be really good ones to read, and they're very short, both of them. And so,
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I love books on history, especially economic, political, financial, a lot of insights. And thanks so much. And how can people find out more about you and learn more about MBA ASAP and connect with you?
oh, thanks, Chris. Yeah, the best way is my website, and that's MBA-ASAP.com. And on there, there's the links to my course, and there's also a link to my email list and things. And please,
Yeah.
anyone email me, and I respond to everything, and love to talk with people. And it's really been a pleasure. Really been a pleasure,
Yeah.
Chris.
I really enjoyed it and so many insights and so much, value for the audience. And thanks so much for coming on and keep up the great work.
Oh, thanks, Chris. You too. Great work you're doing. Really
Thank you.
fantastic.